And it's my privilege to introduce Kerry Kennedy.
I'm so happy to be here today, and I'm especially happy to be here with my dear, dear friend Dick Iannuzzi, the head of NYSUT, who has worked so closely with the RFK Center for Justice and Human Rights on our social justice materials. Being with all the principals in this room reminds me of when I was a little kid and had many, many encounters with my school principal. I went to the Convent of the Sacred Heart in Maryland, and the head master there was called Mother Mouton, and she was this very wise, wonderful Mother Superior. And they had a rule at the convent that no one was allowed to speak in the halls. And I was forever speaking in the halls and then being sent to Mother Mouton. And every time I was sent to her, she would give me a lollipop, and she'd say, you know, Jesus loves you no matter how you misbehave. And then she would start talking about how horrible the war in Vietnam was. And so I really loved her. And one day she said to me, Kerry, just remember that silence is golden, but sometimes it's just plain yellow. And that was an important early message in the importance of speaking truth to power. When I thought I'd talk a little bit about our social justice work, but start with why I became involved in this work. When I was a child, my father, Robert Kennedy, was the Attorney General during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. And my parents did not separate their work life from their home life. So it was all very integrated, and there were always civil rights activists and Justice Department lawyers coming to our house and playing with us and eating dinner with us and discussing the issues of the day. And by the same token, we were also spent a lot of time going to the Justice Department to visit my father. And at the time, we had this enormous convertible. And my mother, I had 10 brothers and sisters, so my mother would pile as many of us who would fit into the back of the convertible, maybe 7 or 8 kids, and then put in a couple dogs and football and bring us down to the Justice Department. And we would go and see my father, which was great fun, but the highlight was always going through the tunnel to the FBI building and watching the sharpshooters at practice, which we loved to do. And there was a suggestion box in the bottom of the FBI building, and one day my mother put a suggestion in that suggestion box. Now, at the time, the director of the FBI was J. Edgar Hoover, who's a man not known for his sense of humor, or for his love of children. And you know, he was so finicky that he made all of his agents get the same haircut and wear the same suit. So anyway, my mother put that suggestion in, and a very astute FBI agent and picked up that suggestion and ran it up to J. Edgar Hoover, who took a look at it and had it sent over to my father's office. And so by the time my mother had gotten all the kids together and the dogs and brought us back up to my father's office, he was opening the first suggestion. And it read, "Get a new director." So that was another early lesson in the importance of speaking truth to power. On another occasion, when I went to the Justice Department, my father wrote a letter to me, which I have on my wall at home. And it says, "Dear Kerry, today was a historic day. Not only because of your visit to the office, but because a few moments ago, despite the objection of the governor of Georgia, 2 Negroes were allowed to register for college. I hope these events are long past by the time you get your pretty little head to college. Love and kisses, Daddy." Well, that was in 1963. And a lot has changed. Barack Obama is president. We don't have federal troops when we try and register people for college, but as all of you know, as principals and administrators, we still have an enormous problem with segregation in our country. I can tell you, my kids go to our local public school in Armonk, Vermont, Byram Hills School District. I couldn't be happier with the quality of education. It's an incredible, incredible school. But in their high school, there are 220 kids per grade, and there's no one on a free lunch program, not one person in our entire district. And there's probably 4 or 5 African Americans in the entire school. One of them is there because her mother is a vice principal in one of the lower schools. So there's still a lot of segregation. Now, that's not segregation because people are banned going into that high school, but because of the housing, traditional housing segregation, as you all know. I can see you're raising, shaking your heads. So that's a big problem that we have to face in New York State. When I was 20 years old, I went and started working at Amnesty International, and I was a sophomore in college, and I took a summer internship. And I documented abuses committed by U.S. immigration officials against refugees from El Salvador. I was horrified to learn how my country was treating the most destitute with such disdain. But I also learned from groups like Amnesty and Human Rights First and other human rights organizations that I could create change, and how lucky we are to be living in this country born of revolution, where institutions are capable of change because of citizen activism. At the time, I also learned about refuseniks in Russia, anti-apartheid activists in South Africa, the mothers of the disappeared in El Salvador, who, like me, were trying to create change in their countries. I was so inspired by their work that I decided to spend the rest of my life doing this. And at that time, all of Eastern Europe, as you know, we just passed the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. All of Eastern Europe was under communism. Today, there's not a communist leader left standing. South Africa was at the height of apartheid. Today, South Africa has had a series of freely elected governments elected by a majority of their people. Yesterday was Nelson Mandela's 91st birthday in freedom. All of Latin America, virtually all of Latin America was under right-wing military dictatorships. Today, the only military dictatorship left standing in Latin America is Castro in Cuba, and they're barely standing. And the Philippines was under Marcos, South Korea was under military dictatorship. So across the world, there have been enormous, enormous changes for freedom. And none of those changes came about because governments wanted them to. In fact, in every case, the governments tried to stop them. And the changes didn't take place because militaries wanted them to. In fact, militaries tried to stop them. And not because multinational corporations wanted them to. In fact, multinational corporations tried to stop them. They came about because small groups of determined people decided that they wanted change. And they harnessed the dream of freedom and made it come true. And we, today, need to embrace that love of freedom and that determination and that firm belief in the capacity of each one of us to create change. And that's what your students need. They need to know that you believe each of them is capable of creating change and making a more just and peaceful world, because that's how these changes are going to happen.